The quality of this talk is likely to be the same as the number of slides.
Okay, there is 0 slides.
Everyone, Mark, who's going to rant about stuff and children, remember the children in the room, so.
Yeah, no, it's PG, it's fine. So yeah, this talk, as you probably guessed from the title, is it originated in an unhinged rant. Actually, originated in several unhinged rants. At which point, Andrew, who I used to work with, who's sat over there, said, "Mark, you really need to do a talk about this because holding on to this pain is not doing you any good." And so I said I'd do it, and that was 2 years ago, so I thought I should probably get around to it, and so that's why I'm here. And yes, it's a bit of a rant. I've got a load of stuff that I'm going to say that is fairly critical of some things that people have put a lot of time and effort into. But hopefully, during the course of my ranting, there will be some things that are things that you can learn from, ways you can work around the deficiencies of some of the things that I talk about, and strategies for not making the tools suck as much for you as they have done for me. So maybe, if there's a point to this talk, it's that you can avoid some of the pain that I've encountered. And when I posted that I was doing this talk on the socials, one of my good friends reached out to me and he said, "Mark, you said that security tools suck. What's my job?" And their job is building security tools. And I said, actually, my point here is not that I hate security tools. Actually, I couldn't do my job without security tools. There isn't really a single security tool that I don't think has some kind of merit. It's just that sometimes it's didn't quite well. And so my starting point really is to say that tools are useful. They don't all suck all of the time. In our jobs, we're trying to do work where the work is reproducible, it's scalable, the function that we're building grows with the business. We want to be able to gather data and act on those data. We want to be able to do things in intelligent, scalable, reproducible ways. And we can't do any of those things by ourselves without any tools, right? So my starting point of this talk, really, is to make the point that, even if there are annoying features of these things, we can't do without them. We've got to learn to make peace with them. And Simon's app doesn't suck, and this talk isn't about you doing that job. Okay. Having said that, tools are pretty much the bane of my life, right? And nearly all of the work I do, and I work in application security, as I said at the beginning, involves tools nearly all of the time. I can't do my job without them. My goodness, do I make it hard. And the first thing that I have difficulties with is the sheer amount of nonsense that you get from your tools. This is not unique, I understand, to application security. In fact, I played with tooling for other domains in security, and it's pretty much the same picture everywhere, right? I said from the outset, we need these tools because we need the metrics, we need the intelligence to do our jobs well. But the difficulty is that there is just so much nonsense there that it's very hard to do those things effectively. And those problems really fall into a few different areas. And the first is that there's a lot of nonsense in the reports. The signal to noise ratio is not great. There's stuff in there that you absolutely need to know, and that's why you use the tools. But a lot of the information they give you is not actionable, and some of it is actually not very good quality data. Now, David lodged in the talk at Steel 2 years ago. David here. Yes, there we go. I recommend you watch the talk on YouTube, and the talk title was, is it Vulnerabilities That Aren't? Is that what you call it? Right, Vulnerabilities That Mostly Aren't, right? And what I took from the talk, and probably there's a load more good stuff in there, is that we don't really help ourselves as an industry through the quality of a lot of the information that we get, right? And there are some fairly badly misaligned incentives in getting CVEs to our names and that sort of thing that mean that there are lots of bug reports that, while people work hard to make them accurate, maybe don't either contain all the information they need or maybe don't age particularly well, right? And you've heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. I did actually make one slide for this talk, by the way, but one slide there's not a presentation made. And basically it's lots of poop emojis and then some vendor logos and then a big poop emoji to get the idea. And if you take the body of information on disclosed vulnerabilities in software components, for example, and you feed those into a tool, and the tool is designed and does a very good job of identifying instances of those things being used, what a surprise, you're going to get a whole lot of stuff out of it. And if a lot of the quality of what goes in isn't great, then surprise, surprise, the signal-to-noise ratio of the tool you're using is not going to be great either. In that set, this has some particular flavours, right? There's one that I like to call the not actually a vulnerability thing. Usually, when you look at it in the vulnerability databases, it has something like disputed vulnerability. There's the euphemism that's used. And this comes from the fact that very often when people are trying to report a problem, they don't have a particularly good concept of what the thing they're using or reporting on is being used for. And maybe they're not very rigorous in identifying or articulating a threat model in which the thing that they found counts as being vulnerability. And I'm going to give you an intentionally vague example here because I don't want researchers coming in saying you said my work rubbish. But I saw a thing relatively recently where people have found a library that had some features. And if you used some of the features in a particular way, you could create a prototype pollution problem in some of the things that library loaded for you, right? But to do that, you needed to have control over the way that the library, that the utility was used, right? And if you're executing code in that context, you kind of won anyway, right? So what threat model does, if I execute code, I can execute more code? Makes sense as a vulnerability, right? So people are laughing at that, right? So that's one example. And another is that, and this is more inherent to the nature of the kind of talking that I'm talking about here. It's really, really hard to provide the information or act on available information that tells you whether a particular issue applies to a context. So to give you a really, really simple example, I remember spending ages trying to work out how we could sort out a dependency problem for a particularly nasty-looking directory traversal and remote code execution combined. And when I realised that we probably couldn't fix it and I needed to work out the exact impact that it would be producing vulnerability, when I got to the really, really small print, it only affected Windows hosts, and of course we never run any of that production stuff in Windows systems. Okay. And so, part of it's who's local to start with. Part of it is actually there's a really, really important bit of context that's missing a lot of the time, and that even if you have it, most of the tooling we have just doesn't have the feature sets or ways of reasoning behind the opportunities. So that's the signal to noise. The next class of issue that I come across are things where the tool does a reasonably good job in isolation, but it makes people hate you. Right? Does anybody as a security person ever find that people don't like them when they raise stuff? Yeah. That's the joke, isn't there? Security, we put the no in innovation. Not what I expected for that. But very quickly, if you work in an environment where you're constantly putting things in people's way, they will sometimes become hesitant to respond to cheerfully when things. And one of the issues that we have with these security tools, particularly with industry cultural changes of late, everything has to shift as far left as possible, and that generally means that you're putting as many things in as many people's way as early as possible, and that sometimes means that they end up having to deal with some of the pain that always before thing. So to give you an example of this, actually I can give you several examples. Ask me later if we give you vendors as well. Let's say we have a check, maybe it checks that secrets being committed, maybe it checks for dependencies being added that have a problem. Those things are things that you absolutely want to look for, but they're comparatively rare, right? Do you want to shift as far left as you can on those issues? Well, probably the credentials being added to your SCM you do. Dependencies, well, I don't know. I can tell you an experience of one tool I had. I found a grounds report of one instance where a developer was prevented from introducing a vulnerable dependency, and several every week where the tool was too dumb to realise that they were fixing the vulnerability, but introducing it, and stopping from completing a pull request without them say so. Right? And it illustrates a problem. If you're going to introduce something that adds a control to the way someone works, if you're not really, really careful about getting that thing right, people are very, very quickly going to start hating it. And so, always my practice was introducing the tool to an organisation, especially if the integration of people's workflows, is I put it on in a sort of soft mode first, so that you get the intelligence to start fixing things before you commit to ruining people's day. And this sort of second point is actually really, really important, because we've got limited time, we've got limited ability to execute on things ourselves. And one of our most valuable assets when we're working within our organisations is our ability to influence people. It's the ability to get people to do things for you cheerfully and have confidence that allows you to carry out work that would not be feasible for you to do by yourself. Right? The social capital aspect of your role is really, really important. So if you have tooling that jeopardises that, you've got a real problem. The third thing that I wanted to talk about, I'm going to do this. The third thing that I wanted to talk about is that actually, a lot of these tools cause us to this point. I've touched a little bit so far on SaaS tooling and SCA in this. There are analogies there with infrastructure as code tooling, analogies with other vulnerabilities management tools there, right? We like them, as I said from the outset, because they give us metrics. We all want to build our processes that are data-driven so that we can set our course and adjust based on the information we have. But that becomes really, really addictive over time, right? You've got information that means you've got a metric, and you've got a thing that you can benchmark something against, and immediately you'll focus on that thing. And the difficulty with spending your time relentlessly chasing a metric is that firstly, you're not necessarily checking to see whether the data you're acting on is the right data. It's data and it might be right, but is it the right thing to be focused on? And secondly, it tends to make you miss the fact that there are lots of immeasurable things that are incredibly important as well. Right? And this becomes really important in the context of the kind of problems that I deal with in software companies, because immediately people will want reports on the things that they can measure, and that will become the thing that you yourself will measure. Let's take the example of SCA to start with. Right? You've got software projects, and it might have a few hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and it might have a few hundred direct dependencies, third-party code, and that translates to probably a few thousand transitive dependencies, right? And when you add up the body of code that you haven't written, well, there's loads and loads there. There's going to be millions, tens of millions of lines of code that other people have written that are effectively part of your attack surface. And it's really, really important, therefore, that you take the security of the things in there seriously. But how do you know which are the most important issues? Draw a picture of a dependency tree in your head. Which are the things you notice? Yeah. Now, one of the difficult things about SCA is that a book formula library, as we've already demonstrated, doesn't necessarily translate to exposure to an equivalent vulnerability of a product. Even if you've got that nasty sort of CVE 9 point something CVSS score, where you've got a path reversal and remote code execution, it's really, really, really bad. But if it doesn't apply to you, it doesn't matter at all. Like running on Windows, for example. And anecdotally, I'd like to get some data from this one day, and I'm kind of working on it. My experience is that the severity and exposure drops off really, really quickly the deeper you get into the dependency tree. So your direct dependencies, you've got to take it very seriously. Indirect dependencies, most of the time, that's an issue. Some of the time they are, we don't forget to look at it. So how do you reason? You look at your dependency tree, how do you reason about what's really important? Firstly, can you make a guess if there's a lot of problems in a particular branch of your dependency tree, that one of those dependencies is a problem? Well, not really. Data doesn't teach that out over time. You just go for the highest scored ones. Well, when you dig into it, affordability of those things tends to be fairly variable, so that doesn't necessarily work. So what else can you do? And what you learn is that actually what your SCA tool is telling you is how well you did. It's not telling you how bad things are now, they're telling you how well you did. And the real thing that you want to fix is dependencies that you rely on directly that you can't respond to quickly if there's a problem. So, take yourself to December a couple of years ago, and you're minding your own business in the run up to Christmas, and something like the Log4j hits. Right? The drill, you go and try and fix a thing everywhere, because it's horribly easy to exploit, and it's catastrophic impact and all that sort of stuff. The real thing that you need to be able to do in that situation is fix all the stuff quickly. And so, what the tool is encouraged to do is to play whack-a-mole with everything. That's not realistic. What you really need to do is to take a look at what it is that you've got that you can't update tomorrow if you need to. So, don't ignore the first, but it turns out that the second is actually a really good way of solving the first problem. Because what happens when you start dealing with that problem is that, firstly, organically, all the stuff you've got lying around that hasn't touched in ages gets sorted out. Sort of certainly the root of the dependency tree out, and the rest of the stuff quickly gets fixed. But more importantly, tomorrow when you get the report you've been dreading, you know that you're in a good place. So to sum up what I talked about first, signal to noise, that's horrible. Security tools suck because they don't help you a lot with a high noise to signal ratio. Secondly, they annoy the people that you really, really don't want to annoy. They lose you allies within your organisation, so you're really, really careful about how you use them. And finally, make sure that when you're introducing a security tool, you're mindful that not only what it can do for you, but what it doesn't, and think about how to help you with the actual goals. So there you go, that's my rant.